All right, I think we're good to start.
Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Veronica Taylor. I am an assistant director at the University of Kentucky in the Office of Sponsored Projects Administration. I've been with UK for about 15 years. I worked at a nonprofit before that for about 6 years on the program side, writing grants and then implementing them once they got funded. So I've had about 22 years of experience working in the grant world, and I'm honored and thrilled to be part of this project. And if you have any questions, I believe that Melissa is going to share those with us. If you want to save them until the end, if you want to pop them up whenever you think of them, I'm happy to answer. And then you can see my email address there on the screen. If you have any questions after, then don't hesitate to reach out, and I'm happy to chat with you. So we will go ahead and get started. So my presentation today is about institutional responsibilities, related specifically to NIH applications and awards, but also the broader implications and responsibilities that institutions have when they're getting grants and awards from foundations or the state. So let me see. This webinar will provide just a basic overview of what you all need to do to ensure that when you are applying for grants, that you're not missing any steps, that when you receive an award, that you have the infrastructure in place in order to carry out that award, monitor, go through audit, and then close out that award so that you can build a great system for yourself to get future awards and grow your sponsored projects enterprise. The first thing we're going to talk about is the required registrations. So if you have never submitted to a federal sponsor before, then these required registrations are going to be needed before you ever do this. And some of them can take some time. So you need to be sure that you have got all of these things in place and you're giving yourself plenty of time to get all of these things in place before you submit a proposal. The first thing that you need, and you already have, I can guarantee it, is an employer identification number. This is your IRS number. It's also known as the tax identification number. I'm sure all of your institutions have this. You may or may not know it, but you're most definitely going to need that EIN. The second thing that you're going to need is a SAM registration. So SAM is the registration portal for any entities that want to do business with the federal government. It's a very simple but robust system that collects a lot of information about your entity. If you have not ever registered in SAM, it takes some time. You have to upload specific documents. So if you need to gather those documents from other offices, then you'll want to go into SAM, start your registration, and it will give you a list of everything that you're going to need so that you can then gather those documents and be able to upload them into the SAM registration system. Your registration is an annual thing for SAM. So once you go in there and you have been approved as a vendor in this system, that's what they're called, as vendors, even though we're not. We are for the federal government because they're giving us money. Then annually, you'll be required to go into the SAM system and renew your registration. So you'll go through and you'll review, make sure nothing needs to be updated, and then you'll just hit yes, we're still doing what we say we are doing. Like I said, this could take some time. SAM recently changed over from using a DUNS number, which is the last bullet on this page, from using a DUNS number to using a UEI, or unique entity identifier number. When SAM switched over from using a DUNS number to using the UEI, it triggered every single entity that's registered in SAM to re-register, even if you've been in there for 30, 40, 50 years. So you can imagine the number of entities that were going into that system and re-registering, including UK. And it was a lengthy process. They seem to have caught up with the backlog, but for a while it was pretty stressful, because if your SAM registration lapses, then you're not eligible to get awards. So you'll want to obviously keep that in mind as well, that you don't want to let it lapse, or else you can't get awards. You won't be able to draw down funds if you have current awards. So you'll want to keep that in mind. The UEI, as I said, it replaced the DUNS number. The DUNS number previously was your unique federal number that was assigned to you via SAM. So your EIN, or your tax number, is assigned by the IRS. The UEI, or the DUNS number, is assigned by the federal government within the SAM system. So this is your entity's specific vendor number that they keep up with in their systems. This one takes a little bit longer. So again, if you don't have a UEI and you know that you'll be submitting a proposal, you'll want to go ahead and get started on that process, because it can take some time. Like I said, it's a very user-friendly system, but there's a lot of information. So I would recommend getting in the system, reviewing everything that you're going to need, gathering it all up, and having it all there ready to go, so that when you do complete the registration, you have everything right there. The other registrations that you're going to need in order to submit a proposal are to grants.gov. Grants.gov is the federal-wide portal for reviewing funding announcements and for submitting proposals. There are other federal agency specific portals that some of them use, but the grants.gov system is the main proposal portal. It's also where you will build your proposal, unless you have an internal system like Cayuse to build your proposal in there. Grants.gov has a section called Workspace, and that's where you will build your proposal in order to submit it. Grants.gov last year in 2022 switched over to using the general login.gov login system. So login.gov was created by the federal government so that you didn't have to remember a whole bunch of passwords to a whole bunch of different systems. They were trying to make it where you could use one login. It's a two-factor login, two-factor authentication login, but you could use one login to get into multiple federal systems. It has caused some consternation, but for the most part, it's running fairly smoothly. Not all of the federal systems are requiring it yet. Grants.gov has started to require the login.gov. The hiccup is that in order to log into grants.gov using login.gov, you also need a grants.gov registration. So you still have to get into grants.gov, register in that system, then register in login.gov, and then link the two. That has caused some confusion. But once you've done it, it's done. That's the good thing. So you will need to get into grants.gov, register in there, and then register in login.gov. As I said, login.gov is a two-factor authentication. So you will need someone's cell phone or an office cell phone or an office phone. You could also use an email address, but they don't really like that because that's not as secure as using a phone. So you will have not only a password for that system, you will also then be given a code as the second authentication way to log into that. As I said, grants.gov is the system where, unless you have an internal system, you'll be building your proposal to submit to NIH. Once it is submitted in grants.gov, it then goes into ERA Commons. So ERA Commons is NIH's system for grants and awards. It manages cradle to grave, so proposals all the way to closeout, financial reporting, progress reports, human subjects reporting, training and fellowship, appointment and termination notices are all done in ERA Commons. So ERA Commons is linked with grants.gov. When you submit the proposal in grants.gov, it will then shift or transfer into ERA Commons, and then you'll be able to log into ERA Commons and see your proposal. It's also where you will submit just-in-time information. It's where you will help the PI or faculty member with their progress reports. It's where your accounting office, or in some cases your office, will be submitting financial reports. And it's where you will request post-award actions like no-cost extensions or change of PI or transfers of awards, budget revision, large budget revisions, things like that. So I personally love ERA Commons. I think it's very easy to use. I think it's a lot easier than some of the other federal systems that are out there. There are other people that think it's a little clunky, that there are a lot of different pages to navigate within Commons. So again, I would suggest that if you have never submitted to NIH or you're not that familiar with Commons, to create yourself a login. You can use the login.gov login, but like grants.gov, you still have to register yourself in Commons and then link the Commons account with the login.gov account. And then you will be able to go into Commons and just look around, basically. Click on the different tabs and see what the different drop downs are. Read the help guides for the different sections of ERA Commons. I also think there are some videos within the help guides that will show you how to navigate the different pages in ERA Commons. So those are your basic required registrations. Once you're in all of these places, then you are systematically ready to submit a proposal. You've got everything in here, and your very next step would be, okay, let's find a funding opportunity and let's start building a proposal. Internal considerations that you want to think about. And again, this is going to be different for everybody depending on the size of your institution. I'm very aware that a lot of small institutions are what we call one-stop shops. They are, it's just you're everything. You're the pre-award, you're the post-award, you're the financial, you're the signing official, you're the AOR, you're everything. So some of this, it may just be you. But there are some things to consider when going through and deciding who these persons are going to be. Your AOR, your authorized organizational representative, that's the person who is authorized by the institution to sign proposals and to receive awards. So that's the person that is whose name is going to be on the proposal when it's submitted, not as the PI, as the institutional person. At UK, we have a vice president for research, and then we have a director of our sponsored projects office. The director has been authorized by the vice president of research to be the AOR. So we have board of trustees minutes from the 50s, I think, that basically says whomever is the director of OSPA is the authorized official for the institution. It could be at smaller, and it is, in fact, at some smaller institutions, the authorized official is the vice president for research, or the provost, or the president. And then they have a letter, or they have board of trustee minutes on file that say, I am the authorized organizational representative, but I am giving you, the OSPA person, the authority and the ability to submit and review and accept on my behalf. So I would just suggest to everyone that you talk that through with whomever your boss is, whomever you report to. If there is an organizational structure from the president down to you, then how is that going to work? Are you going to be considered the AOR? And if so, then just have something in place. It's very, very rare that the federal government will ask you for proof of you being the AOR. We have had on occasion foundations have come back and said, who is your director and why is your director the authorized official? And so we've had to provide them our board of trustees minutes that say that she's the authorized representative for the university. But it's good to have those, obviously. It outlines who's responsible so that there's no question about that. For NIH specifically, if you have more than one person in your office, it may be a good idea for you, if one of you is the AOR, for the other one of you to be what's called a signing official. So for NIH, you can assign someone as a signing official, and they basically have the same rights and responsibilities as the AOR. So at UK, I am a signing official. My boss, the director, is the AOR. There's only one of those at every institution, but there are several research administrators and assistant directors like myself. We are all signing officials. That just means that every time we submit an NIH proposal, we don't have to go to our director. We can submit it ourselves. And we have the authority to do that because she has said, I'm giving you all the authority to do that. That's also really, really helpful because sometimes, people like to go on vacation and we'd really rather not bother her when she's on vacation and we need to submit a proposal. So it's always nice to have a backup, to have someone else who is a signing official. But again, I understand that there are some places it's just you. And so that's what it is. The other internal consideration is about internal approvals. So at a small institution, there may only be one or two proposals every 6 months, or 3 or 4 a year, or whatever. And so it's very, very easy to have a meeting about it, or to have a Zoom call about it and get everybody on the same page. A lot of places will have what's called an internal routing form. We call it an internal approval form. And it just gives the basic description of the proposal that's being submitted. And we show that to the chair of the department and then the dean of research for the college, because we have different colleges within the university. it's just a way to let someone else know, hey, Dr. Brown over in the Department of Mathematics is going to be submitting this proposal. I'm going to let the chair of mathematics know. I'm going to let the dean or the associate dean of that college know, just so they're aware. They may want to get involved. They may say, you know what, this is a really good idea, but I think you need to develop it a little bit more. So maybe wait until next year. They may think, hey, I know somebody else who is doing the same exact research. Why don't you two collaborate? So it's just a way to let other people know that this is being submitted. It's really up to you, honestly. And again, your superiors, how you want to track and file that information. Again, I don't know that we have ever been asked by a federal government about, or by a federal sponsor about these sorts of approvals. But when you submit to a federal sponsor, you are submitting that you have done your due diligence at your institution. So you are saying to them, we've reviewed this. We think this is a good proposal. Everybody that needs to know about it does know about it. We've reviewed conflict of interest, and we think this is ready to be submitted. So these internal approvals are part of that process of when you submit your proposal, you're telling them, we know what we're doing here. Okay. I'm taking a look at my time because I want to make sure that I don't go over time. So federal regulations and agency requirements are I'm going to touch on them, but I'm not going to dig deep into them because I could spend an entire day talking about federal regulations, I'm sure, and you all don't want me to, I promise. So I don't know if and Melissa can speak to this at the end, if these slides will be available to you, but I can also, if they're not readily available, I can also email them out if you would like these specific links to some of these federal regs. But the basic point is that you are aware that there are federal regulations related to federal funding that comes down to institutions. There's something called the Cost Accounting Standards Board that has cost accounting standards, and those are, again, basically the directions on how to create and spend a budget. Obviously, you want to be consistent. You want to be want to make sure that all of your internal policies, your institutional policies, align with your federal policies. For example, if someone is spending 10% of their time on an NIH proposal and their current salary is $50,000, that they're not going to get a 10% increase because of that NIH award. Their salary is $50,000. They don't get a bump. So things like that. And if you're found during an audit that you have violated these cost accounting standards, then you could be, there could be a fine. You could be asked to repay some of the unallowed costs, things like that. So again, you just want to be aware of those. It's cost accounting standards are not just something that are applicable to grants. They're also applicable to other areas of your institution, like purchasing. So I'm sure that your accounting office, even if it's just vaguely aware because of student loans and student financial aid, they're aware of these standards as well. So the other thing, again, I'm not going to dig deep into CAS because we could go on for a while. The other thing to know in your specific case is that sometimes you are excluded from CAS depending on certain exemptions or whether you have less than $7.5 million in federal funding from one award. So you could be exempt from those regulations, and that would be something that you would need to discuss with your director of finance or vice president for finance at your institution about whether or not these would apply to you. 2 CFR 200, uniform guidance. So uniform guidance are the rules and regulations from the federal government about grants and contracts, about federal funding. Uniform guidance was created back in, I want to say 2015, maybe 2014, and replaced a lot of different standalone policies and regulations like A110, A133. For nonprofits, they had their own set of regulations. Institutions of higher education had their own set of regulations. Uniform guidance combined them all together. And it is an extremely lengthy CFR, Code of Federal Regulations, and it outlines what you can and can't do in accordance with federal law and federal guidelines related to grants and spending grants. It also addresses how audits need to take place, what needs to be audited, how often audits need to take place. It also covers things like subawards, which are increasingly more scrutinized than they were even 5 years ago. It also talks about procurement. So again, your purchasing office, grants and contracts isn't just a sponsored projects standalone office. Sponsored projects are going to work with so many other offices on campus, including purchasing, procurement, the finance office, HR, when you're doing effort, tuition, things like that. So it's really, really good that all of these other offices are also aware of these guidelines and of these policies and these terms and conditions. Uniform guidance, you can order a book of it. I have it bookmarked on my computer and do a word search because it is extremely lengthy. And it takes a while to read, frankly, honestly. So I'm not going to read this to you again. I can send this out if I need to, but uniform guidance talks a lot about internal controls. It talks about how you need to treat direct costs, and it also talks about indirect costs. So indirect costs are also called F&A, facilities and administrative costs. And those are the costs like your lights, like your water, your space, unless if it's something that you cannot readily say this expense is specific to a project, then it's most likely an indirect or an F&A cost. Your salary most likely would be part of an F&A or an indirect cost. My salary is, because I work on so many projects that I cannot track what my time goes to each specific project. If you don't have an indirect cost or an F&A cost rate, then you would use 10%. So several years ago, the federal government set 10% as the de minimis rate for those who did not have an indirect cost rate. If you don't have one, you can request one from the agency that you think is going to probably be your biggest funder. For a lot of people, that's Health and Human Services. For UK, that's Health and Human Services. We negotiate our F&A rate with the Department of Health and Human Services and then apply that rate to all of our projects, even if they're funded by another federal agency. they are the rates that are based on, again, the costs that cannot be assigned to a specific project. I am not in any sort of position to counsel on how that process goes, other than to say that at UK, we have 2 full-time people that do our F&A rate negotiations every 3 years, because that's how long it takes, and it's 2 full-time people. It's a lot of back and forth with the federal government about what to include and what not to include, and ultimately it ends up being a formula of whatever your costs are versus what the federal government decides they're going to pay. A lot of institutions actually contract out that negotiation to for-profit companies. There are for-profit companies that do that full time. But I would encourage you that if you don't have an F&A rate at this time, to begin to think about it. If you feel like you're going to be in a position in a couple of years where you think that you want to put in for an F&A rate with your major funder, then you should start thinking about that now and gathering that information and knowing what you're going to need when you start that negotiation. Because an F&A rate can most definitely and will most definitely help your institution. It covers those costs that you can't directly apply to a project. And that's the point of an F&A rate. It is to offset some of the costs that the institution bears when you get a project that you're doing for the federal government. The federal government is very aware that it's not going to pay your water bill, but it also knows that you're going to use water in order to do your project. So these F&A dollars help offset those. The other thing I'm going to touch on just very quickly is about the Federal Funding Accountability and Transparency Act. We call it FAFATA or FATA. This is about subawards, and it basically is a reporting system that you enter information on any subawards that you have greater than $30,000. Several years ago, this law was passed in order to better track where the money is going. And I'll give you a very, very good example. We had an NIH, very large NIHP award or program project award that had 5 subawards on it. And each of those 5 subawards were in completely different places. One was in California. There was one in Italy. There was one in Mexico. And I forget where the other 2 are. But if you just looked at the award, all of the money was coming to Kentucky. So if your congressman or my congressman said, oh, people in Kentucky directly benefited from this $3 million award, well, sure, maybe, but of that $3 million, we sent 500,000 of it to Mexico. We sent 1,000 or 100,000 of it to California. So this law was created so that we report where exactly the money is going and where it's being spent. If you don't have to report on it, it's still important that you keep that information because it can be audited later on if you exceed the threshold in a later year. So let's say in year 1, you only have a $5,000 subaward. You don't have to report on that. But in year 3, you have a $25,000 subaward. Now, suddenly that subaward is over that $30,000 threshold. And so you have to start reporting on it. So again, even if you don't have it right now that hits that threshold, you want to keep all that information because you may have to later on. The other thing about the FATA Act is about executive compensation. So if you are a private institution, most likely the salaries of your highest paid employees or any of your employees are not readily available. The federal government requires that if you receive federal funding, and again, this is related to how much you are receiving, but if you are receiving federal funding, then you have to disclose the 5 people who are paid the most at your institution and how much they are paid. If this information is publicly available somehow, then you are not required to report it additionally. You are just required to say this is publicly available. It's extremely, I won't say it's extremely rare, but it's, in order to report on, I have to report on it like this says, you have to have more than $25 million in revenue from federal awards. If you don't have that, then you don't have to report on it. If you eventually get there, then you will have to start reporting on it, assuming that your salaries are not publicly available. Here at UK, we're a public institution. Our salaries are on the internet. Anybody can go out, look in a database, and see how much I make. So we don't have to report on the 5 highest people that get the 5 highest paid individuals at UK, because anybody can go out and see it at any time. It's very weird having your salary on the internet. I'll just say that too. But hey, it's fine. Certifications and assurances. I'm sure that many of you have seen these before, if not related to grants and contracts, related to other things. So here in Kentucky, we have very strict rules about lobbying. Educational institutions, whether they're private or public, have very specific rules about lobbying. If you are lobbying, you can't use the money, federal money, for that. You are not allowed to get federal money if you are currently debarred, or even further, if someone at your institution is debarred by the federal government, they are not allowed to work on projects that include federal money. There is a debarment list that you have to go in and check to make sure that the person is not on that list. And sometimes, especially with people with common names, you might find someone on the list, and then you have to dig a little bit deeper to make sure that it's not the person working on the project. Our director has a very common name. Her name shows up on the debarred list 4 times, but it's not her. So it's very interesting when we will get an email from NIH or another federal sponsor that says, hey, your director is on the debarred list. Is that right? And no, it's not her. She's never lived in Oklahoma. We're good. But those are things that you have to be aware of. The other thing to be aware of, which again, I'm sure as an educational institution, you are aware of this already, the certification regarding drug-free workplace. It's not workforce, which is a different federal policy. This is workplace. So you're just required to publish a statement to all of your employees saying that you're not allowed to possess or use drugs on the property, and that if you do, employment action can be taken. I'm sure you have all seen those poster boards. For NIH grants specifically, there are several different federal requirements. And again, a lot of these are included in uniform guidance. A lot of these are included in the CAS terms and conditions. The one that I want to specifically point out on this page is the NIH grants policy statement. So the NIH grants policy statement is about a 400-page document that outlines the terms and conditions that cover all NIH awards. So specifically, since we are discussing NIH awards, and you all at some point, I'm thrilled and hoping that you receive some NIH money. This grants policy statement is going to be your go-to. It will be what one of the first places you go to when you say, are we allowed to do this? Or how do I know when I need to request prior approval for equipment? You're going to go to the grants policy statement. It is one of the few things that I have specifically bookmarked that I use probably at least twice a week when I am going through my NIH grants. Control F, you find what you're looking for, and then you know pretty much exactly what the expectation is from NIH. It's very easy to read. It is not written like law sometimes is, where it's very hard to figure out what they mean. It's very easy to read and very easy to apply to real life. The other thing that you obviously might have some terms and conditions in is your notice of award. Your NIH notice of award typically is going to reference all of these other terms and conditions, the grants policy statement, uniform guidance. But if there's anything specific to your project, that would be in the NIH notice of award. It could be something as simple as make sure that you are submitting your financial statement annually. It could be something as specific as you are not allowed to spend any money on this project until you have your advisory board in place. So always want to look at your notice of award when you get it to see if there are any sort of specific terms and conditions or restrictions related to that project before you get it started. Conflict of interest for financials, and I'm going to flip through this real quick. Again, something that is mentioned in uniform guidance. You have to have a policy about financial conflict of interest at your institution, and you have to make sure that you have clear guidelines about reporting for conflicts of interest. You can read subpart F under uniform guidance about this that talks all about conflict of interest and financial. And I'm sure that many of you have probably heard over the past several years about some financial conflicts that have come up related to federal grants. They take this very seriously. So this is something that you want to make sure you have in place. You have a clear set of processes and standards for your conflict of interest. Human subjects, again, something that you need to have in place before you get an award. If a project is going to have human subjects, there are specific guidelines and requirements from the federal government. You can find a lot of that in either, again, uniform guidance or in the NIH grants policy statement about what is needed in order to have human subjects on a project. The same also applies to animal subjects. Animals are obviously a little bit different because you don't need consent from them. You're not getting them to sign something, but you still have to have a process and documents and policies in place for the use and care of animals to make sure that they are treated humanely. Accountability. Again, this is all about, you knowing and accepting the responsibility for getting federal money and using it like you're supposed to. 99.99% of institutions are going to do their very, very best in order to spend the money like they're supposed to. So it assumes that you are taking responsibility and that you are going to meet the federal responsibilities and requirements for the federal money. If you're not able to do that, then you could have your funding terminated. You could be deemed ineligible. Obviously, I would never, I have personally never known anyone at an institution where the institution was unable to receive future federal funding because of something that happened. That would be a pretty major deal. So, you know, again, this is you receiving an award is your acknowledgement that you are going to spend it in accordance with the guidelines. Oh, sorry. Audit, I'm going to just say that if you receive federal funds, then you are required to have an audit. There are different tiers depending on how much in federal funds you get it. But audits are a key point when you have any sort of federal or sponsored projects funding, because it ensures that all of your processes and policies in place are working like they're supposed to. And if they're not, how you can get them to that point. So again, I've touched on this before. It's not just a sponsored projects office. When you get a grant, you're going to have record retention, you're going to have HR, you're going to have effort reporting, you're going to have procurement and purchasing, you're going to have subawards, there might be travel involved. So there's a lot of different players depending on the project that may need to be involved in discussions on how that project is going to be managed and how it's going to be managed and how people are going to make sure that it's running like it's supposed to. Successful has a structure, it has policies and procedures, it has internal controls, it has a financial system. Not everybody has to have a $30 million financial system to get a grant. Most places don't. What you have to have is the ability to know what your policies and processes are and be able to see them through. If you're still using time cards or time sheets, great. As long as you're consistent, you know where they're stored, you know how they're stored, you would be able to produce them in an audit. You can have time sheets, paper time sheets. You don't have to have a fancy system in order to meet the requirements of the federal government. You just have to know what your system is and see it through. Other considerations, again, talking about record retention and accounting structure, you just have to have all of these things in a space where you would be able to produce it in an audit. Record retention is 3 years for the federal government. So if you have a project that is 5 years long, then your 3 years doesn't start until the 5 years is over. So you would be keeping records for that project for a minimum of 8 years. So the 5 years of the project plus 3 years after that. You'll have to know where to store those. You'll have to be able to keep them safe. You'll have to be able to make sure that they are accessible in case anyone needs to look at them. We store them in a cave, which I think is cool. Procurement, again, it's not just your office. It is also the office of procurement or purchasing. You need to be sure that they are aware when something is purchased, whether it's purchased on a grant, and what federal regulations may be under consideration for that purchase. Internal controls, when someone is using a credit card to make a purchase for supplies, that there's a second level of checks and balances, that someone is not just using the credit card on their own and going to Best Buy and purchasing a whole bunch of TVs. Not that that's ever happened. But again, there's a separation, there's checks and balances, there's internal controls to make sure that all of this is not just one person. Again, with the subrecipients, you want to know what you want to have a setup in place for monitoring the subrecipient, to know that when they send you an invoice, it's not just an invoice that says you owe us $10,000, that it has sufficient information, that you know what that's for, that you're getting progress reports that mimic how much they're spending. If they only have one project going and they've only done one experiment, they shouldn't be sending you an invoice for $50,000. And then again, audit. You're expected by the federal government to maintain what we call audit readiness, that at any time the federal government can come in and say, we would like you to show us these records. They've done it. So you want to have those records maintained in a safe place, in a place where all of the records are stored, that they're not all over campus in different offices, and that you would be able to fully provide whatever the auditor needed. We're gonna end with the bad and end with the good. So ineffective grants management could be loss of funding. It could, what we like to say is, end up on the front page of the paper. We don't want to end up on the front page of the paper unless it's, because we did something great. If your institution has to pay back funding, it could be a lot of funding, and that could really, really hurt your institution financially. It could also scar the reputation of the institution or the people within it. And you don't want to be there. So having all of these processes, policies in place before the funding ever gets to you ensures that this would never happen. And then finally, the good stuff. This is the good part. You all have all these policies and processes in place. You all have the structure. You know what you're doing. Not only are you going to get awards, you're going to get more awards. Your structure and infrastructure is going to show that you are trustworthy, that you are a good organization to give federal funding to, because you know what you're doing. It can cause your institution to expand, to get bigger. It helps, again, offset some of the costs of your institution with the F&A, and it will most definitely lead to bigger and better projects in the future. You start out with one small, you get a couple of other small ones, and it just leads to bigger and better things. So with that, Melissa's going to come back. So I don't know what to do now, Melissa. You got to tell me.
All right. Well, we have one question in the Q&A box now. So let's start with that. And if anybody wants to add, certainly feel free to do so. This question says, does the email address used to register with a system need to be the same as the email address used to register with login.gov?
So login.gov is a personal email address system. It specifically says we don't want you to use a shared email address, because shared email addresses, the federal government considers shared email addresses not as secure, because then more than one person would be using it and would know the password, would know the login information. So we have all set up our own login.gov account and have linked that to the university. And that's how we are able to go in as employees of the university and do what we need to do. So it's still my personal email address, but it knows that I am a signing official and that I work for UK in the Office of Sponsored Projects.
Great, thanks.
I hope that answered your question.
All right, the next question says, is your institution keeping records electronically and hard copy or paper-based? We have been moving to an all electronic record system with no printing. What are your thoughts on that?
I think my office is all electronic. There are departments at UK that I know are not electronic. I think if, however you decide to do it, as long as you're consistent and as long as you have safeguards in place where you won't lose the records. So for example, all of our files are electronic. They are stored on a central server that is backed up nightly so that we don't lose any of our records. When we had paper records, they were in a secure location that had like a fire door so that even if the building caught on fire, the records wouldn't catch on fire. And so, you know, I'm not saying you need to go out and buy like a fire door or anything, but no matter what you do, as long as you have the safeguards in place, they're behind a locked door. You know, you're not the only person with a key. There's a couple people with the key in case you decide to go on vacation, so that you have a process in place where you know that they are safe and secure and accessible.
Okay, great. The next question is asking, what type of incentives can be given to human research projects? Is cash still permitted? And if so, under what circumstances?
So I'll speak to this a little bit because we here at UK, we have an office that covers human subjects research. So I do know that there are times when we do give out cash. A lot of departments prefer to use gift cards these days, just because they're easier, frankly, than trying to get cash. If you have petty cash here at UK, it's a very, very specific, secure, lengthy process to get petty cash. So most departments just choose to get gift cards. I know some departments also will do like a check. They will literally send the person a check in the mail after the fact. There have also been times where they have done non-cash incentives. So for example, everybody that participates in this survey is signed up for a drawing for an iPad, something like that. I would encourage you, if you have a human subjects project, that you work with whomever, whether it's going to be an internal office at your institution or an external IRB office, that you run it by them, because there are also specific parameters about how much. For example, here at UK, for a survey study, we're going to give you like $20-25. That doesn't mean that at the University of Ohio or Ohio State for a survey, they can give you $100. So there is some standards and some consistency across the board about what you can pay research subjects. So yeah, I could spend a lot of time on that one too, but the short answer is yes, some people still give cash. I like cash, but a lot of people also go to gift cards or to other things, just because cash can be tricky.
If we have anybody who has joined us by phone and would like to unmute at this point, certainly feel free to do that. Or if you would like to raise your hand and ask a question verbally, that's good too. Veronica, I'll throw something out.
Okay.
Sometimes we see a little confusion from applying PIs. When an NIH award is made, who is that award actually made to?
That award is made to the institution. So when a proposal is submitted and an award is given, the awardee is the institution. There is a PI, obviously, at the institution that is responsible for the programmatic part of it. But the institution is ultimately responsible for the reporting, for making sure that the PI is doing what the PI is supposed to be doing, and for following up with the sponsor in the event that something happens or we need to report on an issue that's come up.
Yeah. This question is asking about if we have a training program for grant writing, and if so, how can I gain more knowledge on grant writing and awards? And the answer to that is yes, we actually have 2 grants funded by the National Institute of General Medical Sciences here at the University of Kentucky that can support that sort of request. And if you can just email me, I'll drop my email in the chat. I'll provide you with some additional information about that.
You can also go out to SRA. So SRAI is the Society of Research Administrators, and NCURA, the National Council of University Research Administrators. Both of those are very good organizations that can provide you training. They have online webinars, basic building budgets, a lot of the things that you would get from this SURE project as well. So there are resources out there for you to view and to attend and get more information about that kind of stuff.
Yep. All right. Well, it looks like we're just after 5 p.m. Again, we will post a recording to our YouTube channel, and I've dropped the link in the chat as well. Usually takes us 2 or 3 business days to get that posted, so do give us a little bit of time to get that on the YouTube channel, but you can go back and review the presentation if you like. Also, as long as Veronica is willing to share her slides, I'll be happy to disseminate those to attendees as well.
Absolutely. You can absolutely have them. And again, I'm down here at the bottom. I'm working from home, so if you want to talk on the phone, I'm absolutely fine with that. Just send me a quick email and say, hey, can we chat over the phone? And I'll be happy to call you and happy to answer any questions that you have.
All right. Well, we appreciate your presentation, and we appreciate those of you who joined us today for spending the last hour with us.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks all.